Thank you very much. Let me see who's, first of all, I want to, we had a couple of our members present. Cheryl Brown was here earlier, and I think Ms. Irwin is here. Thanks so very much for coming, members who have an interest in the budget, in addition to the members who are here. I have on my list of speakers Mr. Ting, Mr. Jones Sawyer, Mr. Rodriguez, Mr. Obernolte, Bigelow, Campos, and Chow. Those are the ones that are scheduled to speak. If there's anyone else, Mr. Chu, sorry about that. If there's anyone else scheduled to speak who would like to speak, I'd like to know. Okay, my staff will get those names. How many? There were, okay, one other one. Okay, thank you. I want to make sure that we get a chance to hear everyone, as well as recognize the fact that we have till 12:30. Most of you know I like to begin and end on time. So I want to, hopefully you will keep your comments brief, keeping in mind that we have a lot of sub-hearings to go, where you will get a chance to make the proposals of new ideas that you have. This is a general discussion of the budget overall, and so hopefully you will be able to ask them about some of the issues they've raised in the budget for clarities as you move forward to develop your individual committee's budget and in response to it, and things that you'd like to see augmented in the budget. The governor has presented his budget. That's what you have. If there are things we think need to be added to the budget, that happens in the subcommittees, not necessarily here today. So I want to make that clear so that we don't have to spend a lot of time on that, but really getting information and clarity concerning what the LAO has said and whether or not the issues raised are accurate or how they go, and as well as what was our finance office has raised. But keep in mind, your subcommittee, you will have lots of opportunity and lots of hearings to talk about new proposals and different ways of funding things and those kinds of things. That's where it occurs, and you'll have lots of advocates and others who will come to help influence that decision and public comments concerning it. So I just want to keep us focused on the task we have ahead for the next 45 minutes. At this time, we'll hear from Mr. Ting.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Blosser just had a follow-up on a number of the comments that Madam Chair made about LCFF. In particular, you mentioned that the acceleration means that the full implementation will happen sooner. Can you give us an example of when you think it will be fully implemented? And then cycling back on, in particular, the concentration and supplemental breakouts, it's been a challenge to really understand or to be able to figure out where the money has gone because the transparency is not there. There's no breakout of the concentration or supplemental grants by district or even at a much more macro level. Can you walk us through what finance is thinking is why that information is not broken down so that we can really understand whether or not the finances are actually getting to the children it's intended to help?
Yeah. So the LCFF was one component of really a major change in the way we finance our schools. Really, the accountability system and how we know what school districts are doing with those monies has also changed dramatically, and we now have local control accountability plans. And those really, the first year of the implementation of those was a huge learning experience for the administration, for the Board of Education, and there's been significant hearings, hundreds of hours of hearings, and significant changes to the LCAP to really focus in on that transparency aspect that you mentioned. So that is one area where we're going to be getting more details about what is happening at the local level in terms of accountability and in terms of how those monies are being spent. I'm going to turn it over to Nick Schweitzer to talk about when we anticipate the full implementation.
Sure. So I think we're rerunning those projections now. I think our original estimate was about 8 years. We're probably still on track there, plus or minus a year. It's very sensitive to what you assume is going to be sort of the out-year revenues. So while we have significant increases in revenues, as we did last year, higher than projected, We also have the Prop 30 tax increases phasing out, so that will, slow down some of the revenue growth a little bit. And, generally we saw, project a return to trend in terms of revenues. So you expect maybe a little bit less revenue growth in the future because of the higher revenues now. So you kind of end up, around about where you thought you were going to be anyway. But so we're running those numbers, but I would still expect we're on track, 8 years plus or minus, 1 or 2 years.
Jennifer Kuhn, Ledge Analyst. So when the state started implementing the LCFF that base year, it was 72% of funded. So it had more generous targets, and it knew that it would take a number of years to get up to those targets. Under the governor's budget, we've estimated for 15-16, so just a few years later, the state would be 85% funded. So it would have made considerable progress. It'd be slightly ahead of schedule in that regard. Having said that, though, because the targets are COLA'd, you have to have growth in the guarantee that's quite a bit faster than COLA to make a serious dent into getting there. So under our 5-year forecast, we have the last year of the period at about 90% funded. So it'll still take, again, a number of years. So although we appear to be on track, it really depends on what happens to the guarantee moving forward. It's very straightforward to calculate. If we were at the full rates today, it would cost the state $57 billion, and $9 billion of it would be associated with supplemental and concentration funding for English learners and low-income students. It's not quite as easy to say exactly how much that we're giving now can be associated with those students, because it's really based on what they were given and a closing of the gap. But we do know by design how much they're supposed to get, and someday we'll know exactly how much they're getting. And in the interim, we're really relying on these plans to help to have districts describe to us what they're doing, so at a minimum we can at least know what they're telling us they're doing.
Yeah, thank you.
Joan Sawyer.
Thank you, Madam Chair. As many of you know, I've been a big advocate of the courts, and have fought like heck to ensure that the trial courts get as much funding. Hopefully you've seen the recent audit by the state auditor, which was very enlightening and unbelievably disturbing in a lot of ways. And I might be one that on this panel that may be looking at doing things another way, at cutting the court budget because of some of the problems that we see in that. While trial courtrooms were being closed all across this state for lack of funds, we were paying about 8 managers $179,000, more than your boss, the governor, more than the general manager of the Department of General Services, who manages thousands of employees. There's about 800 employees, averaging about $82,000, $20,000 more than anybody else at that same level. In addition, they're maintaining a fleet of about 66 cars, 7.2 million employees are part-time. That could have been done by the trial courts, but they're being charged for that. There's about $30 million in questionable court spending and salaries. And the audit points out about $186 million that could go directly to the trial courts, which everyone who was here the last 2 years on the budget that I've been here, that was the #1 priority, getting money to the trial courts. And it looks like there's hundreds of millions not getting to them because of the AOC and the Judicial Council. I was director of real estate. We're leasing space in San Francisco instead of here in Sacramento. People aren't together with their managers, again, with their employees. I'll do it for free. I used to be director of real estate. I can get that done pretty quick. So this kind of Marie Antoinette kind of feeling that let them eat cake. I know it's only 4.2% of the budget, but those individuals make 100% of the decisions on the budget. And I just want to know if the governor has any, as I know that the audit came out about the same time as the budget coming out, but does he have any feelings on what we can do? Should we start by cutting it by $93 million until they can prove that they can come up with over $186 million worth of savings and efficiencies? Because I'm trying to get $250 million back to the trial courts, which we can do if everyone's cooperative on the judicial council and AOC side.
So our budget does include $180 million in additional monies for the trial courts. Our focus of reinvestment has been at the trial court level. That's where the reductions were taken over the recession, and the one-time solutions were required. And so the monies are proposed for the trial courts. I also I just received word, I think last week, that the Chief Justice has started a Blue Ribbon Commission. My understanding is that commission is going to really look at all aspects of the judiciary and how the business of the courts is conducted, and will be looking for efficiencies that will allow the court system to be sustainable and successful, and really focus on access to justice, its main mission over the long term. So that's my understanding of how things are going to be proceeding. So.
I don't get any comfort level with that, but thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Rodriguez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you have two questions on two different items. The first one is the transfer of Latterman properties back to the state regarding Cal Poly. I was very surprised to see that as a line item issue on the budget, especially since I had a meeting with Mr. Rossi from the governor's office here beginning of last year with then Senator Torres to discuss that. And, as of this day, I haven't heard back from anyone. I feel that that property presents a very unique economic development opportunity for city of Pomona, that region, and the state of California. But as I said, to this date, I haven't heard any feedback from the administration, CSU, Cal Poly, anybody regarding the use of that. Since the Latterman property is right in my backyard, my district, I would like to see if I can get a thorough briefing on that property and where we're going with that. Also, I want to be included, and probably along with the city of Pomona representatives, on any proposals that you're looking at doing, and let us hear our thoughts and concerns about it as well we move forward. So will you be willing to work with me and the city and as we move forward with that?
Absolutely. This is a proposal in the budget. CSU has expressed interest, and Cal Poly Pomona has expressed interest in this property that is adjacent. But there are actually many other state interests in that property, and CSU at this time has agreed to accommodate those. But we do agree with you that it's a critical, important area and property, and we do actually have other states, other agencies in the state that have also some interests in co-locating some facilities given the proximity to the freeway and other things. So yes, we would be happy to continue to have discussions about how this proposal, the reuse of this land can go forward.
Okay, thank you. Also had another question regarding the apprenticeship programs. You spoke real briefly on that in your opening remarks. I would like to thank the governor for adding that additional funding for the apprenticeship programs. Also last year, I did carry a bill, AB 1797, which was requiring the Workforce Investment Board to identify job training opportunity programs in healthcare-related industries and fields. So with that, I was just wondering, is the governor's proposal also to expand that to healthcare-related programs as well?
Of the $29 million that's allocated for increased funding for apprenticeships, $15 million is earmarked for really those new apprenticeship programs. So yes, I mean, I think healthcare would be one of the areas that would certainly be a good category, along with other green technology jobs and other emerging careers in California.
Okay, then. Speaking of it, the apprenticeship programs, Madam Chair, if I may, there's a nice article in today's SAC-B regarding apprenticeship programs, and it was kind of unique to have the story, and we're talking about it today. So I would encourage everybody, if they haven't read the SAC-B, this front page, if I can just read a quote off that, Madam Chair. It says, a program offers a way out of poverty and trouble. I think that hits home with a lot of folks here throughout the state of California. So as we move forward with that, I want to thank you and the governor and let's see how we can really help some folks out there in the time of need. So
Thank
with that, thank you.
Mr. Obanoti.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had a question about addressing long-term liabilities. As you know, during the recession, the state of California took out Title 12 loans from the federal government to cover and shore up our unemployment insurance system. And those loans are supposed to be repaid within 2 years. We've failed to repay those loans, and every year that goes by, every employer in the state of California consequently must pay a penalty to the federal government in recompense for the state's failure to repay those loans. And this year, in 2015, the penalty for every employer in the state of California will be over $100 per employee. And what I find particularly onerous about this is that this penalty has nothing to do with whether or not they've been good corporate citizens, has nothing to do with whether or not they laid off employees or laid off nobody. Every employer in our state is going to have to pay this penalty. And we are only one of 7 states in the United States that forces our employers to pay this penalty. Only 2 states pay a higher penalty rate. And this is just going to become worse and worse of a problem because the penalty goes up with every year that goes by. We're 6 years in arrears now. Several years from now, every employer will pay over $200 per employee. So my question is, why is this not one of the long-term liabilities that we're choosing to address, and what's our plan for addressing it?
Kristen Shelton, Department of Finance. This liability, while the state's been paying the interest payment out of the general fund predominantly, is really a liability that is an employer responsibility to fund the unemployment insurance program. And to avoid not being able to pay UI benefits, the state government was able to borrow from the federal government. So it's really a broader responsibility of employers.
Okay, so what I heard you say was the state is paying the interest, but we're not planning to repay the principal because it's viewed as an employer responsibility.
Right. So in lieu of repaying or coming up with a plan that would address the solvency of the unemployment insurance program, essentially the state is incurring and the employers are incurring that FUTA tax credit reduction each year, and that partially does address the solvency, so it's kind of action through some inaction because it's an automatic impact to all employers.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, I mean, I actually dispute that characterization of it, and the reason I dispute it is because if you look at where that liability came from, it came as a result of the states and the federal government's decision to extend those unemployment benefits during the recession, and employers in our state, we gave them no say in whether or not those benefits were extended. So I fear that if we look in the future, I think the projections I've seen, the debt won't be repaid until 2019. And if you look at the penalty that all of these employers are going to be paying at that point, it's going to be incredibly onerous. It's just taking money out of our economy. I would really like to see us get that debt addressed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Bigelow.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First of all, I'd like to start off by just saying congratulations to the chair and the vice chair and your appointment to this prestigious committee. And maybe my condolences a little bit because of the workload that this committee has. But because of your leadership, we're going to do just fine. Both of you are going to make a really good team, and I'm glad that you're both there. So I just wanted to start off by saying thank you for accepting the responsibilities.
You know what I said last night? That applies here, too.
Yes, ma'am. But going on, but it's appropriate to say thank you to you. Also like to say thank you to the governor for the direction that he's taken this budget this year, and it goes in a lot of positive ways. Some ways that we're all still grappling with, you know, trying to find the real meaning and end result of what would be occurring here. As my fellow member over here talked about the trial court funding, clearly we understand there's $180 million in here, but really we boil it down to the $90 million out of the general fund that's really underwriting what's happening here, because you've got 90 that's covering everyday costs. Can you explain those costs? They keep rising. And my fellow member really grappled with this as well. How do we get a handle on those rising costs so that we can stay within the bounds, so that we can meet the needs of our underfunded courts and over-challenged courts with a workload that they can't meet?
Yes. So last May revision, the administration put forward a 2-year funding stability plan for the trial courts. And this included a 5% growth in both the current year and then another 5% growth in the budget year for trial court operations, but also a significant shift in the policy of the state covering the costs associated with of employees related to health care and pensions that are really out of the control of the trial courts. And so but because we do not bargain with their employees, that bargaining is still happening locally. We put forward the policies that were put forward in last year's budget were that the courts had to move towards implementing PEPRA, the pension reforms that the state has implemented over the last several years. So since that time, many local trial courts have moved towards implementing PEPRA with their local employees to really put those costs on a more sustainable trajectory going forward. But healthcare costs, which is a major component of the growing increase in costs, are something that many of them are in the PERS system, and these are issues that we're struggling with as well at the state, which is why we've put forward a proposal to address the long-term liabilities, but also to really look at the cost structure of the state's employee health benefit structure, and something we want to work with PERS on. There's also another component of the funding stabilization plan, including doing some backfilling of the fees. Over the recessionary period, recession, the state shifted a significant portion of funding from the general fund to a fee base. Fees have continued to decline, fees and penalties that are paid to the courts, and so with that, that's caused additional instability for the courts' funding. And so our proposal is to provide a general fund backfill to the reasonable amount of the reduction in fees over time.
Well, thank you very much. One follow-up, and I have 2 other subject matters. Very quickly, Madam Chair. The point to the follow-up is there an analysis that's taken place or will take place to understand when the court transitioned from local government managing it to the courts themselves managing it, what that growth in the cost operations really amounted to? Because it seems like there seems to have been a real growth spurt in the cost during that transition. So it might be something worth going back and taking a look at when we transition from this separating courts from local counties to the judicial system managing it themselves.
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the numbers. I mean, the big shift was really, a shift from a funding consolidation. So the state is really now the primary funding stream for the local trial courts. The county has provided maintenance of effort. But that was really the big shift. I would have to go back and look at what you're seeing in the numbers in terms of increased costs. Yes. Yeah.
Got it. Going quickly on, jumping back to two areas, career technical education. Can you elaborate on the $250 million career tech proposal and how this will preserve the career tech educational system? And will these programs, which are very successful, be funded beyond the 3 years?
So this is a proposal in recognition that career technical education programs are expensive and do often require the purchase of expensive equipment. So the $250 million incentive grant proposal is a proposal, a competitive grant proposal. The recipients of the grant would be required to match dollar for dollar with their local monies. And also have a plan for sustaining the program after the 3 years. And the idea is that this money is really seed money, an infusion of money to really provide an agent for change, to build a new program, to renovate or upgrade a new program. But the whole point of the local control funding formula is that there really should be a local control and local emphasis on successful programs that are doing a good job getting people the skills they need to find good jobs if that's their career path, or the skills they need to move on to higher education. And so our vision for this program is a short-term infusion of money to really build up the programs, but that they would be sustained by the underlying growth of Proposition 98 over time.
Okay, and I thank you for that response, and I appreciate it. But I also recognize that the Career Technical Program had its own statute guaranteed level of funding, and that seems to be changed, and that being a very successful program, at some point with many of these schools looking in different venues of direction now, may go away. And this is where some of those students who don't go on to the higher education really get their basis for success in life and don't wind up on the streets and on our unemployment runs. Thanks for the response. I'll go on to the next questions because I don't want to belabor. The governor, I really was encouraged to deal with the local fairs, a little area that I happen to have had some passion with. But I tie that with catastrophic event centers who have had years and decades, maybe even, of deferred maintenance. I was really wondering, you talked about $66 billion in deferred maintenance, not even in the budget. Those are dollars that normally are planned into the budget cycle, but projects that didn't get done, so they fall off the radar screen. Why aren't we planning for that deferred maintenance to get done so we take care of the things that we own, such as our catastrophic event centers, which, by the way, is where everyone goes during these serious events, like I've suffered, the people in my district have suffered, to have to go to their local fairgrounds or wherever those centers may be.
Deferred maintenance is definitely an issue that weighs heavy on our minds about our long-term liabilities. There was a proposal last year to provide $200 million for deferred maintenance. We were not able to get any additional investment in this current year, but we did put additional money again in this budget, $125 million, specifically for state infrastructure, including UC and CSU, and there is $7 million for the fair infrastructure, which are state properties. I think some people don't realize that, but the state fair or the local fair properties are state properties. There is significant deferred maintenance on those properties, also in our prisons, also at our parks around the state. So it's a daunting issue and problem that we have to face, and I think my best response is that we are continuing to chip away at it and address the most critical issues as they come.
Well, I would say chipping away is a good way to characterize it for a behemoth issue that's growing and growing, and a liability that may someday bite us very severely if we don't address it. So thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to address
Thank you, Mr. Bigelow. Ms. Campos.
Thank you, Madam Chair. There's been a lot of discussion, and I appreciate the comments that you all made around the rainy day fund. And as we move forward and we think about the fact that we, with the passage of Prop 2 passing, that we have a solid rainy day fund, and as we move forward and think about whether we should increase that at the expense of addressing some of these issues that will get people back to work and continue to build our communities to the level where they can sustain themselves. And the communities that I'm talking about are the communities that are poor in resources. And when I listen to the conversation and look at the budget, we're taking them in silos. We're talking about addressing poverty and income equality. We're talking about public safety. We're talking about education. And just to add to one of the questions that Mr. Mullen brought up about the redevelopment, that's also creating infrastructure in underserved communities. And I know that that component being removed, when we think about addressing poverty and income equality, you also have to talk about infrastructures within communities that are poor in resources. So the one thing that I just wanted to lay out the bigger picture, because I think that as I look at the budget, I think that it addresses a lot of important issues, but the bigger picture of how we're going to really address poverty within communities that are poor in resources still leaves this the gap. And when we talk about and we look at numbers of having 1.3 million unemployed Californians, and we look at 1.2 billion in funding for coordinating workforce development system, we still have not connected the two or the different components on how that's going to be done. And when we ask the question of unmet labor demands, how are you going to determine that? And I don't think that's very clear in this budget. So that's just one of my questions, and I know that's a loaded question, but I'd like to understand from the governor's perspective, because it's not clear in the budget, is how is he going to address all of those and how are you connecting them?
Sure. I do want to just clarify something you said at the beginning about a choice about saving for a rainy day fund. And really, the voters made that choice for the state this past November with the passage of Proposition 2, because the Constitution now requires that we put aside 1.5% plus any capital gains revenues above when they get to be above 8% of total revenues. So that transfer to the rainy day fund is not a choice that was a budgetary choice that we made in this January budget, but was actually...
So let me clear. I think I wasn't clear.
Okay.
That I understand. Okay. And the LOA talked about that we could add more so that we have even a healthier one if there is. So I'm talking about the extra money that we may have above that we could either put in the rainy fund or we could use towards the other picture of making sure the communities that are underserved and that are poor in resources could actually benefit from that. That's what I'm talking. So thank you for allowing me to clarify that.
Okay. I think our proposal on workforce development, especially the additional new money, for $500 million for adult education, I think the intent is to get those monies to communities that are low-income communities, areas where there is a lot of unemployment and a need for training to find and match up with the jobs that are available in that region. That is one aspect of our proposal to try and really help low-income communities. The other is the local control funding formula that is putting more money into those schools that are in low-income communities. This is really was a major reorientation in how we distribute the state's Prop 98 funding for schools. So those are a few of the areas where we're doing as much as we can to try and address those issues of inequality and poverty.
And then, Madam Chair, just another follow-up regarding child care. That's the subtitle. But child investment development. I think one of my colleagues brought this up, and I think the beauty about being one of the last speakers is you get to follow up on some of the questions and let the governor know that this is a priority for quite a few members that serve in the assembly. When we talk about investing in K through 12, there's also a huge movement on what we're doing to invest in 1 to 4, 1 to 5, so that by the time they get to K, that they're ready to move forward. A mother of a 6-year-old who is in a public school setting in a very diverse community where you have families that are diverse not only in ethnicity but social economics. You get to witness it firsthand in the development of our children. And I think that until we understand that it is important to invest K through 12, but if we're not investing and continue to make sure that there are funds available for children, or there are slots that continue to increase, and that we're making a bold statement that our children are the priority, so that they have the same opportunity as kids that live in other parts of the states or other parts of our communities where they don't have those challenges because they just have a different lifestyle. I think that no matter, I mean, we can throw money, but unless we make a bold statement and say that we're not going to put a number on our slots, but we're really going to try to make sure that every child has the opportunity to be ready for K or pre-K. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chu.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A question I have involves both infrastructure and income inequality implications. The governor mentioned in his economic outlook that housing growth has slowed. At the same time, housing prices have increased significantly around the state. And we all know that California is the second least affordable state in the country. Many parts of our state, including my district, are in the midst of significant affordable housing crises. I appreciate the governor's dedication of some cap-and-trade funding this year to the Sustainable Communities program, but wanted to ask if the administration has started to look at longer-term strategies for our state to address serious housing affordability challenges.
Housing affordability is certainly a very big challenge in many parts of the state, especially in the San Francisco Bay Area, as you mentioned. You know, we did have some investments just this last year of $200 million to try and address some of those issues, but these are very, very monumental and large issues. I think I saw a figure about some affordable housing being built in San Francisco, which was $500,000 per unit, the cost, and so this is obviously something that you could put a lot of money into, and you would not even really make a very large dent in the problem. It's a very big issue. Last year, in our CalWorks final budget, we were able to allocate, I think, around $30 million to help with critical housing insecurity of those individuals on the CalWorks program. But housing insecurity and affordable housing are big issues that, as a state, we're faced with. Part of it has to do with all the people that would like to live here, and you know, part of so it's a big issue. I recognize it, but you know, don't have a silver bullet solution for it.
So there isn't an effort at this time to discuss long-term strategies.
You know, it's something that we continue to discuss, but I think the big issue is what can the state afford. And right now, our budget is precariously balanced as it is. Significant new ongoing programs for any additional programs just can't be sustained in our current revenue structure.
I'll just comment. You mentioned the $200 million going from cap and trade into this area. Our city alone has lost about $100 million a year if you combine what happened after redevelopment plus the end of Prop 1 seed funding from the infrastructure bonds in 2006. And so just our city alone for 1 year we could certainly use half of that. And of course, you know, from our perspective, that's you know, we appreciate that, but the scale of the problem is significant, and I know not one that is limited just to the Bay Area. We're hearing all up and down the state that this is an issue. So hopefully have an opportunity to have more of a conversation with colleagues and the administration. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Good. Mr. O'Donnell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I will be efficient because I know we're getting long here. Just a couple comments, then a question. With regard to the conversation Mr. Chavez cited, and I know Mr. McCarty is interested in child care versus child development. That's very important. I think the committee should divide those two topics because they are very different. Child development is very important. It helps kids be successful in their out years once they enter the K-12 system. LCFF, I'm very supportive of the governor's effort to fully fund that, so thank you. And thank you for not further micromanaging it. And with regard to the school facilities component of the budget, could you walk us through that? And my take on that is it kind of leaves the locals alone going forward.
Yes, we have a new framework that we have put forward on school facilities. And the big picture emphasis is really on following up on local control. Since locals can now pass bonds with 55% of the voters for school facilities, the shift has already occurred. The state has provided a smaller share of bond monies for school facilities over the last decade that has been in place. So our proposals, we also think the current state program is very cumbersome. It's very centered in Sacramento, and it doesn't allow for the innovation and the flexibility that locals should have when they build their school facilities. So we have three components for consideration that we would propose to increase local control. One is lifting or increasing the caps for bonded indebtedness for locals. The other is restructuring and rethinking the developer fees. And the third one.
So, yes. So it's increasing the local capacity to self-finance, issue debt, to increase those bond caps, to redo developer fees, and then there's an amount of money that school districts are required to set aside every year for deferred maintenance. We'd allow them more flexibility with that funding to use it for new construction, or in most cases they're going to need to use it since the need for new construction, while there's still some need out there, it's much less. The real great need out there going forward is going to be on rehabilitating the existing infrastructure, rebuilding and fixing current buildings.
And we do continue to envision a role for the state for those areas of the state that do not have as an ability to pay locally, low wealth areas of the state. So there would be still a small program that would really be targeted to those school districts that are in very low wealth areas of the state.
So just to clarify, if I may, really what this proposal contemplates is going forward there would be no state match to local funds.
No new state bonds.
Right, which
yes.
would be the match,
yes.
Typically.
That's
correct.
Typically the match.
Thank you. I look forward to more conversation on this topic.
Okay, great. Mr. Bonta, did you have a question?
I did.
Okay.
A quick comment and a quick question. I just wanted to thank my colleagues who have uplifted and raised the issue of the need to continue to address income inequality and poverty in this year's budget, and also for specifically calling out the need for stronger early childhood education programs. I look forward to that discussion as we move forward. And I did have a specific discussion or a question on retiree health care costs. I know that was highlighted in the governor's proposed budget, but I also understand that the projections do not include funding for the employer's component going forward. So the question would be, why didn't it? And maybe that's because there'll be some contract negotiations that will determine amounts. Secondly, what does the administration think about using Prop 2 funding to help support the employer's contribution as part of a shared responsibility approach?
Yes, so we don't have a pre-funding component in the budget because we also don't have any costs associated with forthcoming employee contracts. We do have 4 of our state employee contracts up early this next year, and we would anticipate having the conversation about pre-funding and about a state share and an employee share, which we would envision a 50-50 sharing relationship of that pre-funding obligation. we don't have it built into the budget, but that's where we would have the conversation. In terms of Proposition 2, absolutely, the retiree health care is an eligible debt and liability that is exactly the kind of thing that we would want to see be addressed with that required debt repayment.
Okay. I think we have one last question from our Vice Chair, Ms. Melendez.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Bosler, you've done a fantastic job today of fielding nearly all of the questions, so you get to take a break. Mr. Taylor, I have a question for you. So we've had a lot of discussion today about the debts we have, the liabilities we have. My colleague, Mr. Obernolte, made a very good point about the unemployment insurance loan that we really need to pay back that's costing us a lot of money, and I agree with him. We also have the retiree and health benefits that we have to address. So in the governor's budget proposal, he envisions $3.4 billion in reserves. Given the fact that California is, I think, the 5th most volatile state with respect to revenue, tell me what you envision an adequate level of reserves would be for a state of this size and a state that has this much volatility in its revenue.
I think longer term, the Proposition 2 designated a 10% maximum reserve for the BSA. I think that was very appropriate as sort of a minimum. In fact, I think if you took out the states that are very heavily oil dependent, like Texas or Alaska or North Dakota, I imagine we're probably the most volatile for our basic revenue structure. So you need to think in terms of having a large reserve. I appreciate that as you've been building it, you have other needs that you're trying to balance. In November, our report, based on our estimates, we had a $4.2 billion reserve. Again, it just flows from the different way that we do the capital gains. I thought that would be a great starting point, as I said earlier. But 3.4 is not bad. And I appreciate the different pressures that you have on you from various groups. I would hope that would be sort of a floor and that you would hope that maybe you could build on that. Because, again, a downturn is coming in the near future. We don't think it's next year. California is growing well, but things can happen. And the more that you have the reserve, the less disruptive it is to you in making these sort of terrible short-term budget adjustments.
Thank you. I want to thank Ms. Bosler and Mr. Taylor for coming and fielding all the questions. You'll have an opportunity to see them a lot during this process, them and their staff, in terms of the various subcommittees. Clearly, from the conversations and the statements made, this is going to be a very lively conversation for the next 4 months till we get to May revise. But that's a good thing for California, and I really thank you for coming. Thanks our members for being here. Thank you for being timely. Melendez and I like to start and stop on time if you noticed, so we can promise you that if you're here, we'll try to make sure we keep the process rolling on time. Thanks so very much, and thank you all for coming. The meeting is adjourned. You have 1 minute to use.